Luke Miller holds up an oyster the size of 2 fists. The San Diego State University researcher is handling the mollusks in a lab on the Scripps Institution of Oceanography campus.
Oop. One last squirt.
Miller and Gabriela Kalbach are in the midst of attaching magnets to each of the oyster shells. Kalbach is removing the slate coating on the shell of the wild-caught oysters. That'll give the glue that holds the sensors a chance to get a strong grip.
Cover the sensor, but leave the number 3 visible, I would say. And you need to sort of press it down onto the, work it down onto the surface initially to get it to get a good bond to the surface.
When the oyster opens its shell to breathe or feed, the magnets on each shell will separate. The sensors attached measure how much the shell opens and how frequently it happens.
The kind of reading it's giving there is the measurement between this magnet and this sensor. So if I move this sensor around, we can see that reading kind of changes. Now it's around 390, but as I move the sensor, it increases.
Being able to record how often the oyster opens its shell is valuable, especially if researchers can compare the behavior to local water conditions. They want to see how a biological creature reacts to the stress of living in an extreme environment. Scripps Institution of Oceanography researcher Sarah Giddings says the oysters could help researchers understand how they cope.
An estuary is a perfect environment to do this study because estuaries are where you have the meeting of the ocean with often river flow, or in some cases, if no river flow, there's excess heating. What that means is that you have very strong gradients in temperature, salinity, all of the physical parameters that are much stronger than you see in the open ocean.
Giddings says estuaries can lose access to salt water. They can heat up, they can be inundated with nutrients, and dissolved oxygen levels in the water can crash in a matter of hours.
And the key thing that we're going to do is make the link to the physical parameters. So the velocity, so the currents that they're feeling, the salinity, the temperature, and importantly, the dissolved oxygen that they're experiencing.
Giddings hopes to expand and refine the project. Right now, data recorded by the sensors has to be gathered by hand. Researchers actually go into the field to collect data chips from a small computer that floats above a rope and anchor that holds the oysters. If that information can be transmitted in real time, scientists could record conditions and reactions as they happen.
If we do see a direct response to their environment, that we could actually use these sensors in the future to learn more about the environment. So actually use the oysters to tell us something about the environment and start to think about other organisms and other locations where we could deploy them.
Researchers are releasing the oysters in the Los Penasquitos Lagoon and the Tijuana River estuary. The mollusks have zip ties glued onto their shells so they can be attached to a float or anchor. That'll give scientists data from the surface and from the estuary floor. Miller says oysters can thrive there, but they also struggle in extreme conditions.
And so in those cases, they will tend to just close themselves up, completely seal themselves off from the external environment and wait it out. Basically wait a couple of hours. Every once in a while, they'll open up a little bit and test, draw in a little bit of water, see what it tastes like in some sense, whether there's any oxygen in it.
The oysters are photographed before they're released to see how they'll do this winter, and Miller says he expects all of them to come back alive.
We've taken these oysters from the original estuaries they grew up in. We're going to put them back in those same estuaries unless conditions get particularly bad during the spring, winter and spring periods, especially if oxygen drops particularly low. We expect that they'll survive just fine.
The oysters are being deployed soon in the Tijuana River estuary, and they'll be collected this spring. When that happens, scientists will put together data sets that help them understand just how the living creatures were affected by the changes in the local estuaries. Erik Anderson, KPBS News.